For 33 years, they were Hollywood's ultimate power couple, until a breaking point phone call in Aspen shattered a multi-million-dollar empire overnight. From a shocking lack of a prenup to a bitter public feud over a new girlfriend, this is the brutal, untold truth behind Rachel Zoe and Rodger Berman's devastating divorce. To understand the real reason behind Rachel Zoe and Rodger Berman's divorce, one must look far beyond the surface-level talking points of Hollywood burnout or standard irreconcilable differences. One must dissect the foundational structure of their relationship, a structure built on total professional entanglement, a blurring of personal boundaries, a shifting family dynamic, and a slow, agonizing accumulation of micro-frustrations that Rachel herself famously categorized as death by 1,000 cuts. The origin story, George Washington University, and the MAC chili lipstick. To comprehend why the end of this relationship was so complex, we must return to the very beginning, the fall of 1991 at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. Rachel Rosenzweig, long before she became the singular global mononym Rachel Zoe, the titan of boho chic styling and the queen of oversized sunglasses, was a 19-year-old undergraduate student working as a restaurant hostess. Rodger Berman was a 22-year-old student working as a waiter at the same establishment. In interviews given decades later, both described that initial encounter with a cinematic vividness that borders on mythical. Rodger recalled laying eyes on Rachel the moment she walked through the doors. She was wearing a tight black mini dress, high-heeled pumps, thick, voluminous straight hair, and lips painted in a striking, unforgettable shade of red, specifically MAC chili lipstick. For Rodger, it was an indelible moment. He was captivated by her striking aura, her fierce confidence, and her unmistakable energy. For Rachel, the young man with a dry wit and steady demeanor provided an immediate sense of grounding. They began dating shortly after that encounter. When their university years concluded, they made the pivotal move to New York City, the beating heart of American fashion and finance. In those early days, their roles were distinct yet complementary. Rachel plunged headfirst into the cutthroat world of fashion styling, assisting editors, curating looks for rising stars, and developing an eye for vintage-infused glamour that would soon revolutionize Hollywood red carpets. Rodger, meanwhile, entered the traditional and lucrative world of investment banking, securing a position at Ladenburg Thalmann. At this juncture, they were typical young professionals carving out independent paths in a demanding city. But this separation of professional spheres was not destined to last. As Rachel's career gained explosive momentum, morphing from a solo stylist into a burgeoning brand centered around her personal aesthetic, client list, and media presence, she encountered a logistical and operational crisis. She needed someone she could trust implicitly. She needed someone who understood her vision, shared her financial sensibilities, and could protect her interests in an industry notorious for chewing up and spitting out creative talent. She turned to Rodger, and in doing so, she fundamentally altered the DNA of their relationship. The business of being Rachel Zoe when the husband becomes the CEO. The transition of Rodger Berman from investment banker to the president of Rachel Zoe Inc. is perhaps the single most critical factor in understanding the eventual unraveling of their marriage. Most casual viewers of Bravo's hit reality series, The Rachel Zoe Project, which ran for 5 defining seasons between 2008 and 2013, saw Rodger simply as the supportive, dryly funny husband who rolled his eyes at Rachel's theatrical declarations of fashion emergencies. He was the calm to her storm, the voice of reason who called her raw, and gently coaxed her down from the metaphorical ledges of lost sample dresses and high-stress fittings. Behind the scenes, however, Rodger's role was far more complex and all-consuming. His official corporate biography during the peak of the brand's success described his responsibilities with chilling precision. He handled all finance, legal, and employee oversight, working in direct conjunction with his wife to set the overall strategic direction of the brand. He negotiated high-stakes licensing partnerships, managed lucrative brand extensions, oversaw digital media properties like the Zoe Report, and handled the structural architecture of Box of Style and Curator. In essence, Rachel was the creative brand, but Rodger was the builder and operator of the entire building. For the first decade of this arrangement, the model worked with staggering success. Together, they transformed a celebrity stylist's name into a household brand. They were financially prosperous, professionally dominant, and culturally influential. On their joint podcast, appropriately titled Works for Us, they projected an image of a couple who had figured out the ultimate secret to modern partnership, mixing business with romance. In a 2021 interview, Rachel famously remarked, "I always say behind many successful women, there is a really, really good man rooting for them." At the time, those words were entirely genuine. Rodger had spent decades rooting for her, building the legal and financial scaffolding that allowed her creative genius to soar without commercial friction. Yet, seeds of structural decay were quietly planted within this very success. When a romantic partner is also your chief financial officer, your legal negotiator, your primary boss at work, and your co-parent at home, where does the relationship go to simply be a relationship? The blurring of boundaries, the boardroom at the kitchen table. As Rachel would later confess with raw, unfiltered candor on the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, the complete absence of professional separation eventually consumed every oxygen-rich environment in their lives. In a marriage where business decisions are made across the breakfast table and marital disagreements are intertwined with corporate contract negotiations, the boundaries between personal grievances and professional disputes cease to exist. If a business deal fell through, it was not just a corporate setback. It was a joint failure that permeated their domestic life. If Rachel felt creatively stifled, the friction inevitably directed itself toward the man managing the books. Reflecting on these decades of total entanglement during the season 15 premiere of RHOBH, Rachel uttered a sentence that stopped longtime fans in their tracks. In hindsight, if I had to say a great regret, my greatest regret would probably be working together. This realization did not arrive overnight. It was the result of a slow, multi-year realization that they had outgrown each other fundamentally. While they had spent their entire adult lives growing side by side, the demands of maintaining an empire required them to morph into specific corporate and public personas. Over time, those personas calcified. By the time they looked across the room at one another in their later years, the people staring back felt increasingly unfamiliar. Rachel noted that the person she had spent her whole adult life with became, in many ways, unrecognizable. The intimacy that had sustained them through their 20s and 30s was slowly replaced by the efficient machinery of a business partnership. They were running a multi-layered enterprise, but the romantic engine driving it had run completely dry. The arrival of children and the shift in priorities. Compounding the pressure of their fused professional and personal lives was a major biological and domestic milestone, the arrival of their two sons, Skylar Morrison Berman and Caius Jagger Berman. The timeline of their family planning is striking in its context. Rachel and Rodger spent 18 years as a couple, nearly 2 full decades, without children. During this prolonged period, their relationship was defined exclusively by their mutual ambition, their social circles, and the construction of Rachel Zoe Inc. They were each other's entire universe, bound tightly by the shared adrenaline of conquering the fashion world. When Skylar arrived in 2011 and Caius followed in 2013, the earthquake to their established dynamic was profound. Children changed the physics of any marriage, but for a couple whose entire existence had been calibrated around high-stress career acceleration and total professional codependency, the arrival of 2 boys realigned their individual needs in drastically different directions. Rachel's maternal instincts became fiercely protective and all-consuming. She was navigating the high-wire act of being a mother in the public eye while maintaining an intense work schedule. Rodger, meanwhile, remained deeply entrenched in the administrative operations of their shared enterprises. According to sources close to the family and hints dropped by Rachel during her reality television run, the parenting dynamic began to fray under the weight of accumulated resentments. The very traits that made Rodger an effective corporate manager, his analytical detachment, his structured approach to conflict, and his emotional reserve, did not always translate into the warm, fluid, emotional intelligence required during high-stress parenting moments. Over the years, the boys themselves began to notice shifts in their father's behavior and demeanor following the separation, often asking questions that highlighted a growing emotional disconnect within the household. The long goodbye, staying past the expiration date. One of the most shocking revelations to emerge from Rachel's post-separation commentary is the timeline of her internal detachment. While the public was shocked by the September 2024 announcement and the subsequent July 2005 divorce filings, hints dropped by external parties and corroborated by timeline analyses suggest that the marriage had been functionally over in private long before the paperwork was ever drafted. In public statements made by individuals within Rodger's inner circle, such as comments highlighted by his later partner, Brie Jacobe, it was suggested that Rachel had privately expressed dissatisfaction years prior, with some estimates pointing as far back as 2019. If that timeline holds any weight, it means Rachel remained in a marriage she knew had expired for upwards of 5 years. Why would a global fashion icon, a woman of immense wealth and independent success, stay in a depleted marriage for half a decade after recognizing its end? The answer lies in the sheer complexity of a 33-year entanglement. When your entire adult life is interwoven with another person, when your businesses, your public identity, your friendship circles, your family history, and your daily routines are stitched together with heavy industrial thread, pulling out a single stitch threatens to unravel the entire fabric. Furthermore, the couple had spent considerable energy maintaining the illusion of enduring stability. They hosted podcasts about relationship success. They shared milestone anniversaries on social media with romantic captions celebrating their wild ride. They were the institutional memory of each other's lives. Walking away from that required a monumental psychological shift. It required Rachel to accept that the monumental edifice they had constructed was no longer a sanctuary, but a cage. And so, they lingered in the twilight zone of a finished marriage, coexisting, managing the brands, raising the boys, and waiting for the catalyst that would finally force their hands. The summer of 2024, the Aspen weekend that changed everything. Every long-fading marriage eventually reaches a tipping point, a singular, undeniable moment where the illusion of repair shatters permanently. For Rachel Zoe and Rodger Berman, that moment arrived during the first weekend of August 2024. The setting was picturesque, but the events were explosive. Rodger was in Aspen, Colorado, while Rachel remained in Los Angeles due to professional hosting commitments. A phone call bridged the geographical gap, but whatever transpired during that conversation acted as a catastrophic structural failure for the relationship. Rachel later described the incident with visceral intensity on camera, noting that when the call came through, she literally split open. She explained to her fellow cast members that when core trust is broken in such a definitive manner, it is like glass shattering. There is simply no way to glue it back together. For the preceding 2 years, according to her confessional accounts, she and Rodger had been locked in an exhausting cycle of back-and-forth fighting and half-hearted reconciliations. They were trying desperately to repair a foundation that had suffered too many structural fractures. But the Aspen weekend made further negotiation impossible. In her own words, that specific weekend made it real easy to go. When pressed by co-stars like Dorrit Kemsley on The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills to specify the exact mechanics of what happened, Rachel maintained a degree of boundary discipline, noting that there were a myriad of bad decisions that have been made over the last month, the last week, the last hour that triggered her to finally move things forward legally. While she stopped short of broadcasting every private detail to the world, she provided more than enough context for viewers and investigators to understand that the emotional point of no return had been violently crossed. On June 27, 2024, a date later formally cited in legal documents, the physical and emotional separation was locked into place, paving the way for the public announcement that would shock the entertainment world 2 months later in September. Entering the Bravo sphere, controlling the narrative on RHOBH. The decision to join the cast of The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills for its 15th season was viewed by industry analysts as both a brilliant strategic move and a high-risk emotional gamble. When Andy Cohen announced Rachel's addition to the franchise, pop culture pundits immediately recognized the underlying narrative arc. Rachel Zoe was entering the reality television arena at the exact moment her personal life was undergoing its most painful public reinvention. For a woman who had spent 2 decades meticulously curating her public presentation, allowing cameras to capture her raw grief, her legal frustrations, and her vulnerability was a radical departure. Yet stepping into the Housewives universe served a dual purpose. First, It placed her firmly within an ecosystem of powerful women who understood the immense pressures of public divorces. Second, it allowed Rachel to seize control of her own narrative. In an era where tabloid speculation can distort facts beyond recognition, speaking directly to the camera allowed her to contextualize the end of her 33-year chapter on her own terms. Andy Cohen noted during interviews that Rachel was at a profound transitional crossroads in her life. She was reconnecting with old acquaintances like Kyle Hilton and Kyle Richards, leaning heavily on her female friendships, and learning how to exist as an independent entity for the first time since her late teens. However, joining a reality show while navigating a high-profile divorce also meant opening the floodgates to external scrutiny, unscripted confrontations, and the unavoidable friction of conflicting personal accounts from people orbiting her ex-husband. The girlfriend, the camp drop-off, and the public war of words. If the divorce filing and the Aspen weekend provided the dramatic core of Rachel's storyline, the emergence of Rodger's new partner injected a volatile dose of modern reality television warfare into the mix. Following the separation, Rodger quickly moved forward with his personal life. He was publicly photographed on Los Angeles sidewalks by media outlets like the Daily Mail, walking arm in arm with a 36-year-old stylist named Bree Jacoby. When producers on RHOBH questioned Rachel regarding the timeline of Rodger and Bree's romance, specifically asking whether it began immediately after their split, Rachel's response was characteristically pointed. You do the math. The real flashpoint, however, occurred off-screen and spilled into the public consciousness via emotional confessions on the show and aggressive social media statements. The incident centered around their two sons, Skylar and Caius, as they prepared to depart for summer camp. According to Rachel's account on a December 2025 episode of RHOBH, Bree Jacoby appeared unannounced at the departure site to meet the young boys for the very first time. Rachel was incandescent with rage over the timing and execution of the introduction. To a protective mother whose children were already navigating the emotional turbulence of a high-profile divorce, having their father's new romantic partner suddenly appear at a travel send-off without prior coordination felt entirely inappropriate and avoidably stressful for the children. Literally, sheafing appears, Rachel recounted to her co-stars with palpable disbelief. She's there with him and shows up and says hi to my sons. What the F? This explosive revelation triggered a fierce public counteroffensive from Bree Jacoby. Taking to Instagram stories, Bree published a multi-slide statement that sharply contested the narrative being broadcast on television. Bree claimed that she had met the children a full year after dating their father, labeled Rachel's television portrayal as the work of a great actor, and accused the fashion designer of taking zero accountability for her own behavior during the marriage. In a particularly barbed concluding remark, Bree referenced a rumored sentiment from the divorce proceedings. You did not want to be married and said it yourself. You wish you left 7 years ago. You're acting like a jealous woman. See you at the bar mitzvah. This public sparring match highlighted the deep bitterness that underpinning the final stages of the dissolution. While Rachel was attempting to frame her exit as an empowered reclamation of self, the entry of a new partner into the children's orbit transformed a civil legal separation into an active ideological battleground. The financial architecture. No prenup, no spousal support, and a clean break beneath the emotional drama of reality television cameras and Instagram stories lies a financial and legal reality that is remarkably understated given the scale of their empire: the absence of a prenuptial agreement. When Rachel officially filed for divorce in Los Angeles in July 2005, citing the June 27, 2004 separation date, court documents revealed a surprisingly pragmatic approach to the division of their assets. Despite having built a multi-million-dollar fashion and media business together without a prenup, neither party sought spousal support. Furthermore, Rachel requested joint legal and physical custody of Skylar and Caius, emphasizing that co-parenting amicably remained their primary collective responsibility. In various interviews, including a February 2026 appearance on Watch What Happens Live, Rachel confirmed that while the divorce was progressing toward finalization, the amicable framework was driven entirely by a mutual desire to protect their children's well-being. Yet, untangling a 26-year marriage where the husband served as the chief financial and legal officer of the wife's eponymous brand is no small feat. The company name, Rachel Zoe, belonged entirely to her persona and identity. But the infrastructure, the financial structuring, the corporate negotiations, and the operational systems that turned that name into a global powerhouse were engineered by Rodger. In the initial September 2024 joint statement, the couple claimed they were committed to continuing to work together within the many businesses we share. By the time the formal divorce filings were processed, that language had vanished, replaced by the standard legal terminology of irreconcilable differences. The most symbolic gesture of this financial and personal untangling came in the legal paperwork itself. Rachel formally requested that her legal last name be restored to her maiden name, Rosenzweig, while retaining her professional moniker, Rachel Zoe. The name on the brand stays, but the man who ran the building is permanently checking out. Conclusion: what 33 years really means. The story of Rachel Zoe and Rodger Berman is ultimately a modern cautionary tale about the high cost of total enmeshment. It illustrates what happens when two ambitious individuals bind their identities, their careers, their finances, and their daily existence so tightly together that there is no room left for individual evolution. They met as college students in the early 90s, fueled by ambition and the vibrant energy of youth. They built an iconic fashion empire from the ground up, weathered the unpredictable storms of the entertainment industry, and brought two beloved sons into the world. They were partners in every sense of the word, romantically, professionally, and creatively. Yet, as the decades passed, the very machinery that built their success became the prison of their relationship. The blurring of professional boundaries, the exhaustion of constant public scrutiny, the natural divergence of their personal needs, and the slow accumulation of 1,000 tiny cuts eventually eroded the foundation they had poured in their 20s. When Rachel filed for divorce and returned to the television screen to tell her truth, she was not just ending a marriage. She was performing a surgical extraction. She was stripping away 33 years of shared identity to find the woman who had walked into a Washington, D.C. restaurant in a tight black mini dress and MAC chili lipstick so many decades ago. As the legal proceedings finally reach their conclusion and both parties navigate their respective post-divorce realities, the legacy of Rachel Zoe and Rodger Berman remains a complex mosaic of immense achievement and profound personal cost. It proves that even in the glitzy, polished world of Beverly Hills fashion, no amount of success, glamour, or corporate architecture can save a relationship when the foundational reasons for staying have finally turned to dust.